Where is the horn that was blown? They have passed like rain on the mountains, like wind in the meadow. The days have gone down in the west, behind the hills, into shadow. How did it come to this?
Good morning, everyone. Hope you're all having a wonderful day today. Today, we're going to be talking about another LPVO. This one here is a fairly interesting option and something that a lot of guys in the comment section of previous videos, specifically with the Vortex, the Strike Eagles, have actually compared it to. This is the Bushnell, the AR Optics, they're 1:8. This is with the BTR-1 Reticle, which is actually a very good reticle in my opinion. But before we get into it, if you want to support the channel in any way, you can go ahead and check out any of the links down in the description. I have a Subscribe Star, Instagram, Olight affiliate code, or if you want, you can go ahead and just like, share, and subscribe. Now, with that out of the way, let's go ahead and talk about this optic. So first up, let's go ahead and talk about the specs. It's slightly over 10 inches long. It's like 10.2 inches long. It's just over 16 ounces. I want to say it's 16 and a half ounces. So it's actually fairly lightweight for a 1:8, especially in this price range. So with the mount, as you see it right now, it's like 21 and a half ounces, somewhere in that range. So it's a very lightweight optic. 30 millimeter tube, 24 millimeter objective lens, again very standard. It does come with a very interesting throw lever design, which is one of the only standout features on it, I would say. So you have a flippable throw lever that folds down when you don't want it, which is a nice feature. And it also comes with two, so it comes with a short one and a long one, depending on your specific style. I believe this is the long one. I find it very usable, and it does fold down nice and compact, so if you're putting it in bags, that sort of thing, it doesn't stick out the side or something like that. You do have capped turrets. They are 1/2 MOA, and these turrets, even though they're capped, they're actually really good. They have a really positive, very tactile clicks, and they make a good audible sound. So let me zero that back out again. But they work really well, even though they are capped turrets. Now on LPVOs, for the most part, I recommend capped turrets just because you want them to be more durable. Most of the time, they're designed to be set and forget. This is a one-piece aluminum body, hard coat anodized. Other than that, it's fairly simple. You do have an illuminated reticle. We'll talk about the illumination and the reticle in just a minute. But overall, the size and features is actually a little bit smaller than most of your other budget, a little bit smaller and lighter actually than a lot of your other budget LPVOs, which is in my opinion, really nice. So if you're trying to save weight, you're trying to save ounces, this can be a good option for those very versatile rifles that you may want to put this on. So first up, let's talk about the actual eye box. So now the eye box on this guy is on 1X, which we're on right now, is honestly, you can get a really good sight picture from like 5.5, 6 inches out, all the way to about 3 inches. So you on 1X, you have a huge amount of forward and backward eye box, which is really nice. The eye relief on it is really good. The left to right, up and down, that sort of thing is a little bit tighter than some of the other LPVOs in this range, but in terms of just eye relief, you have a huge amount of eye relief on 1X. Now, when you flip it over to 8X, just like anything, it does tighten up a little bit, and in this case it actually tightens up a little bit more than like the Vortex Strike Eagle Gen 2 on 8X. All that means is that you will have to move your head a little bit farther forward on this optic when you have to cycle all the way out to 8X. versus when you're using the Vortex Strike Eagle Gen 2 1:8. So the eye relief on the Bushnell 1:8 is actually, in my opinion, really, really good. Like I said, on 1X, it's extremely forgiving, and if you rotate all the way out to 8X, you still have a fairly forgiving eye box. So the eye box left, right, up, and down isn't too bad. It is tighter than it is on 1X, of course, and the eye relief itself is still good. So you have eye relief, generally speaking, anywhere from like 3 to 5 inches, which is really good. So you have a lot of options in terms of mounting, where you're mounting this further forward or further back, so it can fit on a lot of different guns and fit very comfortably. Now, as I already mentioned, eye box is fairly forgiving on 1X. It's not as good as it is on other optics. The eye box on 8X is very tight, but still very usable. It's still very fast. I have no trouble finding it when I have it set up properly on different guns. Speaking of different guns that I've had it on, this has been on 3 or 4 different guns, I want to say. So I did a few hundred rounds on my Wolf A1. It was a 14.5-inch version, and then I went ahead and I threw it on actually a hunting rifle, a Thompson Center in 300 Win Mag, and I put a couple boxes of 300 Win Mag through it. With this optic on it, in steel rings with a very aggressive muzzle brake, and it handled that just fine with no zero shift. We'll talk about that. And then after that, I threw it on my 12.5-inch AR-10, and it handled that recoil just fine, just like it should. So now let's go ahead and talk about the reticle. The reticle specifically that this optic ships with is the BTR-1, which is a bit of a mixed bag in my opinion. It's very good for some things and not so good for other things. It's pretty much a full circle, a very, very thick circle that kind of tapers down towards the bottom where it has a hole in it for the BDC. The BDC in this reticle is designed to be zeroed at 100 yards with 5.56 or 308. And it has hash marks out to 2, 3, 4, and 500 yards. Now, 500 yards for me is more than far enough. However, some other 1:8s in this price range have BDCs or MOA out to 6, 7, and 800 yards. So depending on your use case scenario, maybe the reticle doesn't work that good, because if you are taking shots at 6, 7, 800 yards, then you are actually going to have to take off the cap and then dial with it. So for just pure long-range target, if you had this on a bit of like an SPR build, like a 20-inch 308 or an 18-inch 308 or a 20-inch 5.56, something like that, and you wanted to take it out to 600, 700 yards, you would end up having to do some dialing on your capped turret. So something to keep in mind, that you can't just use the BDC. Now, with this optic, I took it out to 420 yards, actually on the 300 Win Mag. I had a bunch of different people shoot it, and at 420 yards with a 300 Win Mag using 150 grain soft point ammunition, just PPU, I think it was like 20 bucks a box, which is actually fairly cheap, almost as cheap as 308 is right now. So I put a couple boxes through it, and hitting at 420 yards with this optic, this reticle, was not a problem. 300 Win Mag is incredibly fast and incredibly flat. So with that 150 grain load, we were getting 3,200 feet per second with 150 grain round. And so at 420 yards with a 50-yard zero, which is a little short, but is kind of just what I had time to set up for, on a 300 Win Mag, we were pretty much putting the dot on the head and the first hash mark on the bottom of the target, and it was just hitting that target fairly consistently for what the rifle was. Now, where the reticle really shines is in close range, because you have that extremely thick circle that has a lot of room on the inside. It draws your eye to the center very fast, and you do have that very precise center dot in it, which I really like. So you pretty much just have that center dot, and then you have the cascading hash marks underneath for your different ranges, but that makes it very, very fast in close range. The circle does not obscure too much of the field of view to be obnoxious, but it is big enough and thick enough that even without the illumination, it makes it very, very fast to use up close. So I do like using the reticle quite a bit. Now, where that can translate into issues is when you have it dialed all the way up to, say, 8x. And you're using the BDC, especially towards the bottom of the BDC where it gets closer to that circle, it does tend to get a little bit crowded. So depending on your target size, your target distance, it can be a little bit more difficult to use at long range, though again, I think for most people, and I would recommend using this as like a 0 to 400 yard scope. So if you're using this on more of an SPR build where you're thinking you might go out to 600, 700 yards, I would probably look at different LPVOs for that. Going off of that, let's talk about the actual field of view, because that's a very important thing for LPVOs, is to have a good field of view, what you're actually seeing at 1x and what you're seeing at 8x. So at 1x, this has exactly 100 feet of field of view, at 100 yards. Now, most of you know, for me, 100 feet is kind of the breaking point between a poor field of view and a good field of view, so this is directly on that line. This is comparable with very, very cheap optics. For instance, the UTG 1-8 also has a 100, I think it has a 105 or 100.5 feet field of view at 100 yards, and this has a 100 feet field of view at 100 yards. We're going to compare that to the Strike Eagle Gen 2 1-8, which has 110 feet, which is much larger. Remember, we're talking about a circle, so that's actually a lot more surface area. And then we're going to talk about the 1-6, which has 117 feet, or 116.5 at 100 yards, which is an immense amount of field of view. So when you're looking through this optic at 1x and not so much at 8x, you don't really notice it that much when you're at 8x because it's only a few feet difference. But at 1x, you will definitely notice that you have a vastly tighter eye box than a lot of other comparable optics. Now, how big of a deal is that to you? It kind of depends on how you shoot. If you do a lot of shooting where you are, locked into the optic as you shoot, that can be a bad thing because you're not seeing a lot through it. However, if you are not necessarily doing really close range target transitions and you're just in the optic for what you need to be into, and then you're down and looking around, that sort of thing, it's not that big of a deal because, again, you shouldn't be tunnel vision through your optic. That being said, if you are looking through your optic, you're going to see a lot less. So I do prefer, it's hard to go back to something that has a very shallow field of view when you're using other optics that have just a much, much wider field of view on 1x. Even though I think the reticle on a 1x is very good, so this still can be very fast, but it is something to note that it does have a more shallow field of view compared to similar offerings. Before we get into some other negatives and some other things that I don't really like about this optic, let's go ahead and talk about its drop test and its zero shift performance. So I accidentally put this through 4 drop tests. Normally I only do 2, but on this one here, I did 4 accidentally just because I couldn't remember that I actually had already done it. And so I did 4 drop tests on it, and both times I got no shift in impact using the exact same point of aim, which was pretty excellent at both 50 and 80 yards. So 1 drop test was done with my 14.5-inch Wolf A1, not a very heavy gun. And then the next set of drops was done on my 12.5-inch AR-10, which doesn't sound like it's very heavy, but it's like a 10, 11-pound gun fully loaded. And no shift in point of impact with the same point of aim, which is absolutely awesome. Something else to note is I zeroed this with 300 Win Mag. I put through a couple boxes of it. Again, I think it was steel worn mounts that I had it on because I couldn't use rings on it because it's a hunting rifle. So I had a different mount on it, and after 40 rounds with a very, very aggressive muzzle brake, which is very harsh on optics because it's pretty much accelerates and slows down really fast, so it's really hard on optics. Again, 40 rounds of 300 Win Mag, no shift in zero, which is awesome. So for everything that I don't like about this optic, the one thing that it did very, very well is, one, it didn't break on me through submersion tests, through 4 drop tests, through very heavy recoiling guns, both 300 Win Mag and 308. It held up exceptionally well. And on top of that, Bushnell does have their ironclad warranty on this scope, which in my opinion is just as good as the Vortex VIP warranty. The ironclad warranty covers the work and the materials if you break or damage the scope, and they consider the lifetime of an optic, so it is a lifetime warranty, they consider that 30 years. So a lifetime warranty, or in this case a 30-year warranty, is absolutely excellent, and it does add a lot of value, especially in this price range. Okay, now that we mentioned that, let's mention a few other things that I kind of don't like about this scope and I think kind of hold it back. One of those things is that this is very subjective, but it feels very cheap. Both the turrets on the left and right for windage and elevation and your illumination, they feel very cheap and like what you would find on like really, really budget scopes. And I'm somebody who has tested a lot of really, really budget scopes. They feel very, very cheap, just like that. As well, the throw lever, I'm not sure if this is just mine, but it is incredibly unsmooth. There is a rough patch between 2 and 4x magnification where it's smooth and then it hits like a wall, and it's very hard, very hard, very hard until you get about to 4, and then it's smooth again from 4 to 8. Now, this did get worse during the drop tests, and a lot of the shooting was done in a really, really dusty environment, and you could, after shooting it for a little while, I could feel the dust and the grit that had got into the magnification lever here. So it is, while it did well in the submersion tests, definitely is not sealed in this section anyways for dust and debris. That may be specific to mine after drop tests, but it came out of the box with a very, very rough spot in the magnification ring. Not sure why that is, but that did just happen. That being said, it is a very, very minor drawback to me, and it's so minor that I'm not gonna like send it in for warranty work on that, because again, it's just a very, very minor thing that I have to deal with, so I'm just going to leave that. So now let's go ahead and talk about the illumination. The illumination on it, it goes from 1 to 6, which, you know, a lot of companies have like 12 illumination settings or, you know, 10 illumination settings, that sort of thing, when really you only end up using 2 or 3 of them at most. You might use like 5 or 6 during low light, and then you're going to use either the max or just under the max in full daylight. But with this optic, the 6, which is the maximum magnification setting, is very bright for indoor use, but it is not what I would consider daylight bright. It does tint the reticle in full daylight, so you can still use it up close, and I generally do run with it maxed out most of the time when I'm shooting. And you know, depending on where I'm shooting, depending on the lighting conditions, it can be a help, but you actually really don't need it. Just because I find the reticle to be very, very fast. It's very thick, so it's very easy to find the reticle even without illumination up close. That being said, it's another area where both the Strike Eagle Gen 2s outclass it with much better, much hotter illumination. That being said though, one nice thing about the illumination is that it does have off indentations in between each brightness setting. So if you're on 6, you don't need to look at it. You can just turn it either direction, one click, and you are in the off setting, which is more of a high-end feature, even though the illumination is not all that great. It is usable, and in low light, you know, where it really needs to be good, it is good, it is precise, it doesn't really blow out on you. So I do like the illumination on it, but it's just not as bright as I would like it to be in full daylight. That being said, of course, as I mentioned, the reticle is very fast, so you can still definitely use it. Also, something to mention is that this is the only LPVO that I own where I actually had to adjust the diopter for my eyes. I have really, really good eyesight. I have 20/10 vision in my right eye. And this is the only LPVO that I've ever had to adjust the diopter on to see the reticle clearly. Now that could be just different geometry, different eyes, that sort of things. So not a big issue, just something that I thought I would mention. So now let's go ahead and talk about price and how I feel that this falls in the marketplace. So the MSRP on this is like $350 from Bushnell, I want to say, which is $50 less than the Strike Eagle 1 to 8. And $50 more than the Strike Eagle 1 to 6. So I think it actually falls pretty much perfectly in line. Now, most of the time when you're actually buying this, you're going to be spending somewhere between $300 and $325 because, of course, nobody really charges MSRP. So you're going to be spending right at $300, maybe a little bit more than $300, and maybe in some places you can find it with a mount. So say for a total package like $350 or so. And that is about $25 to $50 cheaper than the 1 to 8. So it really does kind of sandwich just underneath the 1 to 8 and just above the 1 to 6. Now, if you're in the market for a $300 optic, 1 to 6, or the Bushnell 1 to 8, but you just really want that 8x magnification, if your use case scenario is more of a range gun where you take consistent shots out to 400, 500 yards, and you want that 8x magnification, then this is still an excellent option. And if you just want that 8x magnification, it is going to be, you know, you're going to get 30% more zoom than the Vortex Strike Eagle 1 to 6. So dollar for dollar, I think that these scopes are nearly identical in terms of value. I'm going to actually do a side-by-side comparison for you guys. You guys can see in footage of the glass of the 1 to 8 and of the 1 to 8 Vortex and the 1 to 8 Bushnell. So you guys can see them side by side with the same camera, same settings, same day, back to back. And so you guys can kind of see for yourself, and then I'll do a little talking portion and kind of give you guys some of the differences between the two optics. All right, so this is of course the Bushnell, the AR Optics 1 to 8, 30mm tube, all that sort of good stuff. So right now I'm just doing a straight up glass comparison between this and the Vortex Strike Eagle Gen 2, their 1 to 8, which is in a similar price point. So at 1x here on the Bushnell, you have very good edge-to-edge clarity. The very edges are slightly discolored, a little bit of a bluish discoloration at the very edges on the Bushnell 1 to 8. The image is fairly flat, although you can, if you move your head left or right, you can tell there is a little bit of warping going on. That reticle is extremely fast though, extremely thick, and still precise enough at 1x. When you bring it all the way up to 8, it's a little rough. What you have here is very good focus. Parallax is fixed on, I want to say, 100 yards. And not a lot to complain here. The eye box does tighten up as you would expect. Edge to edge is still good, and there's very little, if any, actual optical degradation at max magnification. And back to back here is the Strike Eagle Gen 2, the 1:8. And just immediately, the first thing you'll notice is you have no color distortion at the very edge at 1x. You do have slight distortion towards the edges, a little bit of haze towards the edges, but one thing you will notice is that the image itself looks a little brighter, probably has slightly better glass in this, and you also have a much wider field of view and a much more forgiving eye box, even at 1x. So those two things make it much faster and easier to pick up targets at 1x, especially if you're shooting from odd positions like around cover, that sort of thing. I've done some barricade work with both of these optics, and the 1:8, the Strike Eagle Gen 2, just outclasses it nearly every way, from odd shooting angles, that sort of thing. That being said, the reticle itself on the Bushnell is slightly faster. So I do think that the Bushnell 1:8 is a good value. I think the reticle on it is very good. I have some very minor complaints about it. The warranty is very, very solid, especially for the money. And I think that you got to be in a really niche point to purchase this over some other optics. For instance, it's only, $25 to $50 cheaper than the Vortex Strike Eagle Gen 2 1:8, and sometimes you can find this with a mount for $400, whereas you might be spending about that amount with the Bushnell variant. And it's about $50 more expensive than the 1:6 version. Again, you can find this with a mount for sometimes like $300, which puts it, $50 to $75 cheaper than the Bushnell. So what it really comes down to is what you need it for and what you plan to do with it. If you plan to do a lot of up close personal shooting around barricades, that sort of thing, the Bushnell is going to fall behind the other optics just because it has a much shallower field of view. So you're going to be able to see a lot less. It might take you more time to pick up your targets. That being said, if you're doing like 3-gun matches, or you're doing other things where you have known targets and they're exactly in the same spot every time, and you're not necessarily looking through your optic as you're transitioning, you're kind of bringing your gun up on target, then the field of view might not be that big of a deal. And you do get that 8x magnification versus the Vortex Strike Eagle 1:6. Now, one quick thing to note about this comparison is that it has been mentioned to me that the Strike Eagle, the Gen 2 optics, are quite a bit better than the Gen 1. So if you're trying to compare a Gen 1 to the Bushnell 1:8, then you're probably going to be better off with the Bushnell 1:8. But since the Gen 2 is out of the Strike Eagle, we are comparing it against that. Now, if they do make a Gen 2 of this with some fairly simple improvements, this could, and keep it in the same price point, this could be a better comparison against the Strike Eagle Gen 2, but because of course this is the optic that we have right now, this is the comparison at this time. So in the end, I do think that this is a good optic, and I think it has an excellent warranty, but I think in some ways it is outclassed in terms of function and features to other similarly priced optics. So if maybe it fits your bill specifically that you need, but for most people there are probably slightly different optics up or down that are going to make a little more sense than the Bushnell 1:8 at this time. So that's pretty much it for the video, guys. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you all enjoyed. If you've made it this far, go ahead and like, share, and subscribe. Like I mentioned in the beginning, it really does help out the channel and helps these videos get shared to more people, and it just helps out the channel in general. So that being said, thank you guys once again for watching. I will see you guys in the next one. Peace off.